In the early 1990s, young travelers from across the globe were drawn to Australia's endless coastlines, remote forests, and promises of adventure. Among them were vibrant backpackers, full of life, optimism, and wanderlust, looking to explore a country they believed was safe. But what none of them could have imagined was that deep in the shadows of New South Wales, evil was watching. And it wasn't just watching, it was hunting. The disappearances began subtly. A couple from Germany never made it to their next stop. A British backpacker failed to check in with family. Another was last seen hitchhiking along a stretch of road near the Hume Highway. At first, authorities assumed accidents, or maybe even runaways. After all, travelers sometimes go off-grid. But then, in 1992, a gruesome discovery shattered that illusion. Two runners exploring the Belanglo State Forest stumbled upon a shallow grave. Inside were the decomposed remains of two women, British backpackers, Caroline Clark and Joanne Walters. Their bodies had been mutilated, and both had been subjected to horrific violence. Joanne had been stabbed multiple times, while Caroline was found with bullet wounds and signs of prolonged torture. What truly horrified investigators, though, was the chilling, methodical nature of the murders. Both women had been bound and restrained, as if the killer had taken time. Pleasure. Suddenly, the narrative changed. These weren't disappearances, they were executions. Within a year, the remains of 5 more victims were found in the same forest. Each discovery painted the same picture. Young backpackers, murdered and dumped like trash in the wilderness. Victims included German tourists, Gabor Neugebauer and Anja Habschied, as well as Deborah Everest and James Gibson from Melbourne, and Simone Schmidl. The victims had all gone missing between 1989 and 1992. Some had been missing for years, their families living in limbo, not knowing the truth. Now that truth was being unearthed, literally. Panic gripped Australia. Tourists stopped hitchhiking. Locals avoided the forest. Every newspaper screamed the same phrase, "Serial killer on the loose." But what made these killings even more sinister wasn't just the brutality, it was the geography. Belanglo was isolated, remote, and hard to reach without local knowledge. Whoever the killer was, they knew this land well. This wasn't random. This was someone who hunted, who stalked, who enjoyed the control. Investigators began piecing together patterns. All the victims had been last seen hitchhiking or traveling through the same areas. That led to one chilling realization. The killer was likely picking up backpackers on the road, gaining their trust, then driving them to their deaths. And because the victims came from different countries and vanished at different times, no one had connected the dots, until now. As the public demanded answers, police launched Task Force Air, one of the largest manhunts in Australian history. Hundreds of suspects were questioned, and known criminals were investigated. But there were no witnesses, no surviving victims, or so they thought. Then came the turning point. A man named Paul Onions, a British backpacker who had escaped an attempted abduction in 1990. He had been picked up by a man offering a ride, but something felt off. The driver was calm, cold, and overly curious. When the driver suddenly pulled out a gun and tried to tie him up, Paul ran for his life, escaping into oncoming traffic and flagging down help. He reported the incident to Australian police at the time, but with no connection to any murders back then. The case had gone cold. Now, 2 years later, his story resurfaced. And when police cross-referenced the location, the method, and the vehicle, a name emerged from the shadows. Ivan Milat. A road worker from a large family with a history of violence, Ivan had a troubling obsession with guns and knives. His calm exterior masked something darker. When police raided his house, what they found confirmed their worst fears. Items belonging to the murdered backpackers, including clothing, cameras, and even camping gear. a chilling trophy room of human lives. The man who had stalked the roads of New South Wales, lured tourists with a friendly smile, and turned a peaceful forest into a graveyard, was now in handcuffs. But as the investigation unfolded, one terrifying question lingered in the air. Were there more victims out there, buried in the silence of the forest? This was just the beginning of the Ivan Milat nightmare. The man who inspired the horror film, Wolf Creek, was about to face justice, but the depths of his cruelty were still being revealed. The moment Paul Bunyan's testimony resurfaced, everything changed. His 1990 escape from a mysterious man who tried to abduct him with a gun wasn't just an isolated incident anymore. It was the missing piece. He described the vehicle, the weapons, and the demeanor of the man in terrifying detail. But what made his story even more powerful was his memory. Crystal clear, as if the trauma had carved the moment into his mind, and the name associated with his attacker: Ivan Milat. Milat wasn't a stranger to the law. A road worker from a large, tight-knit family, he had been charged with petty theft and violent behavior in the past. But nothing serious ever stuck. Quiet and unassuming to neighbors, Ivan blended into the background of Western Sydney life. But his obsession with weapons, his connection to the locations where the victims vanished, and now the survivor's ID, all of it pointed to something far more sinister. Police moved quickly but quietly. Surveillance was placed on the Milat family home. What they saw was unsettling. Ivan regularly cleaned his weapons, acted paranoid, and avoided strangers. On May 22, 1994, after weeks of gathering intel, police raided his house. What they discovered wasn't just incriminating, it was horrifying. Inside Ivan Milat's home were firearms matching the bullets found at the crime scenes. But more damning were the personal belongings of his victims: sleeping bags, backpacks, cameras, and even clothing. Things that should have been with their rightful owners. These weren't keepsakes, they were trophies. As the evidence piled up, Ivan remained cold and calculating. He denied everything, even as the walls closed in. In his mind, he was too smart to get caught, too careful. But investigators had built their case meticulously. They even brought Paul Onions back to Australia to positively identify Milat in a lineup. When he did, the courtroom tension cracked wide open. The trial of Ivan Milat became one of the most followed in Australian history. The media dubbed him the backpacker killer, and the nation watched in disbelief as the details unfolded. Victim by victim, the prosecution painted a picture of a man driven not by desperation or greed, but by control. Ivan stalked his victims, manipulated their trust, and used his local knowledge to carry out his murders without witnesses. He lured them with the promise of help, then delivered them into horror. But even as overwhelming evidence was laid bare, Milat remained expressionless. No remorse, no breakdowns. Just a chilling, calm presence that made people shiver. To him, this was just a game, and he thought he could still win. In July 1996, the verdict was delivered. Ivan Milat was found guilty of 7 counts of murder and 1 of attempted abduction. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in relief, and families of the victims embraced as justice finally arrived. But many believe the real number of his victims was much higher. Milat never confessed. He never revealed his full truth. There were gaps in the timeline, missing persons who fit the same profile, and evidence too sparse to connect. Police strongly suspected he may have killed dozens, perhaps alone, perhaps not. Some theorized members of the Milat family knew more than they claimed. Ivan spent the rest of his life in prison, never admitting guilt, never apologizing. Even after a hunger strike in which he demanded a PlayStation in his cell, a move that showed just how detached from reality he was, Milat never broke. In 2019, he died in prison from cancer, and with him, the secrets he buried in the forest. died too. But the damage he did lingers. Belanglo State Forest, once a peaceful place, became a site of mourning and fear. A dark part of Australian history that cannot be erased. Tourists who once hitchhiked freely now think twice. And survivors like Paul Onions are haunted forever by the moment they looked into the eyes of a man who could have killed them, and lived to tell the story. The horror of Ivan Milat lives on in books, documentaries, and most famously, in the Iyad film Wolf Creek. Though fictionalized, the film captures the brutal essence of what made Milat's crimes so terrifying, that they could happen anywhere, to anyone, without warning. If you found this story as shocking as we did, please give this video a like, share it with other true crime lovers, and subscribe for more of the world's darkest and most chilling stories. Every week, we dig deep into real cases that will leave you questioning what's real and who you can trust.